We are Rogue Media Sports.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Doomsday podcast. Ed, it's hard for me not to say the Matt Mosley show. It's Doomsday, though. And Ed, we're both fresh back from Oxnard. After a couple of days back, Ed, the heat was quite an adjustment. But, I mean, as we were leaving Oxnard, Ed, it was kind of cool. We got huge interviews coming up. People are going to get to hear from Brian Schottenheimer. That morning, we had the one-on-one or the two-on-one with Stephen Jones, and then I had to catch a flight out. And then you had secured an interview for the Doomsday podcast with Brian Schottenheimer, which we'll be sharing with you soon. But Ed, it's right as we got home, they had their first padded practice on that Monday. And I always go through that thing. I'm like, well, should we have been out there for the padded practice?
If we'd have stayed for the padded practice, then we would have had to stay for the media party.
Yes.
In Malibu at the swanky restaurant where Jerry apparently spends about $50,000.
Yeah.
And is available for some off-the-record conversations, which might have benefited us for this program. So I think it would be wise to extend our stay another couple days, even if we can't have to endure the 70-degree temperatures.
Yeah, and since we've returned, for those outside the Metroplex listening to us, it is probably about 105 every day, high of about 107. And that even keeps Ed off the golf course. Not much does, but
I can honestly... When we endure these kinds of temperatures, I honestly can't fathom how those players did it. 2 practices a day, actual live hitting, Jimmy Johnson up there, ASS, or in Wichita Falls, even when it was the kinder, gentler Barry Switzer approach. Yeah. But in this heat, how did everybody survive?
Yeah. I think
25, 30 years ago.
Well,
myself included.
And if you think about it, the Vikings lost a player,
Corey Stringer,
and that contributed to a lot of how the NFL and how other teams condition players and try to acclimate them and all of that kind of stuff. But it is crazy. And if you go back farther. You
picked a strange time to worry about your vocabulary.
It's always a tricky one.
Further, I can see the debate going on.
Well, I know it's I'm a typical writer. I try to
farther is physical distance.
Edit myself as I go along.
The correct choice.
Further, yeah, it's fine. But they used to, in the late '60s, when my dad was playing college football, they used to give the players salt tablets. And that's how, like, hydration. Anyway, we've come a long way in certain respects. Ed, a lot going on, even since we've returned. They have started having padded practices. I enjoy watching all the video of that because you do see our man Mozzie, and we can talk a little bit about him. And then I think we should mention, too, the Cowboys have a preseason game Saturday, which, interestingly, they're treating as a road game in a sense. They're going to come in and get right back to Oxnard. I think they do not want to experience much of this weather.
Because week 2, they play at Seattle. And then after that game, they come home and finish training camp here at the Star for a couple weeks before they play another preseason game and then get ready for the Giants in the regular season opener.
Now, before we set up the Brian Schottenheimer, Ed Werder exclusive, which I'm excited for everybody to hear.
About 25 good minutes.
Oh, I mean,
15 of it was good, but it went for 25.
I think 15 is a little high. No, I thought excellent stuff. Although I don't think you've You're thinking about the uncut version. Frito's had his way with,
he has?
with the interview.
Frito's editing now?
Wow. Frito's been doing surgery.
I think our listeners will enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, he just added some like production value.
I know he's shooting this right now. He's shooting video.
Music. Hey, yeah. Where's that going to be? Now, Zach Martin, Ed, still, as we tape this, has not arrived in Oxnard, nor will he be with the team, we don't think, Saturday as they get ready to take on Jacksonville in the first of 3 preseason games. And that was interesting as we were getting ready to leave and come back. I mean, you had some time with Jerry. Jerry basically did not seem to show much empathy / sympathy for Zach Martin's plight. Basically, like, every step of the way, he's been paid. We're not going to do anything.
He's been a first-round pick his whole professional football life. He's been paid accordingly. He did a deal in 2016, a 6-year deal. He's got 2 years left. The Cowboys' point of view is when they did the deal in 2018, they made him the highest-paid interior offensive lineman in the NFL. And so Zach Martin benefited in the early phase of the contract, and the Cowboys now want to benefit at the end when it seems wholly unfair that Zach Martin is paid $7 million per season less than Quentin Nelson in Indianapolis and a couple of other offensive linemen who have signed recently. And he wants fair market value for what he is. He's an all-pro every year. There aren't very many of these types of players who have ever been in this or any other organization who have achieved on a consistent basis what Zach Martin has, and that's why he thinks an exception should be made. The problem for Jerry in his argument is that they did virtually the same thing Zach Martin is asking for with Larry Allen at virtually the same point in his career. He was 33 years old. He was still an all-pro type player, and they redid that deal. Now, Jerry, as you mentioned, has continued very strong rhetoric, even as recently as this week, saying, again, as if he has to remind Zach Martin of how punitive the new CBA is for holdout players. When Zeke Elliott held out in 2019, this CBA didn't exist, and the Cowboys weren't able to fine him like they are Zach Martin. They're forced to fine Zach Martin $50,000 a day in his absence. So he's over $600,000 right now in fines. But I think this is really a matter of principle for him, and I think the resolution, if there's going to be one before the first week of the regular season, it's going to require Mike McCarthy and his coaching staff to prevail upon Jerry that we have a great team, huge amount of talent, very promising season. Do we really want to risk the start of the season losing games or getting our quarterback hurt? Because, I mean, McCarthy said his goal is to have, Dak play every game for the first time since 2019. Well, that becomes a hell of a lot less likely if Zach Martin's not at right guard, because you already don't know what's going to happen with Tyron Smith at left tackle. How long is he going to last? How well is he going to play? I'd be more worried about him than I am about Zach Martin and holding the line on him.
I mean, to your point, though, the last time a coach went and did something like this, they gave Zeke Elliott a deal they're still trying to get out from under, all these years later.
They got out from under it when they released it.
Well, they did, but I'm just saying the ramifications of it have lasted longer than that. So I think it'll be interesting, and I think what they're counting on is they think the way Zach Martin is wired that he can't let down his teammates. Like, it's not in him. Now, could they sweeten it a little bit and almost do something a little bit like what the Giants did with Saquon Barkley, like just a little something? Maybe.
Matthew Judon just got a $7 million, improvement in his contract with the Patriots in a very similar type of situation that could kind of be the blueprint for something like this. But yeah, I mean, they did. They got hurt in the last contract that they gave in on, and they did things they said they wouldn't do, and they did it to accommodate Jason Garrett because Garrett was going into a season where his fate was going to be determined as the head coach. And he knew it. And his point of view with Jerry was, you can't say I have to win to keep my job and deny me my best player, which in his mind at the time was Ezekiel Elliott. And so the Cowboys did a bunch of things they said they would never do, including make him the highest paid player at his position. And that's one of the worst contracts in the history of the franchise.
Correct.
I don't think that's going to. I don't think that's what Zach Martin is asking for.
No.
And Zeke, to his credit, he did the right thing for him.
Yeah.
I mean, look at what's happened to these running backs. He absolutely did the right thing for him.
Yeah. He'll never play again, but
if he
set
doesn't,
himself
then
up.
he might never have played again anyway. But at least he got all that money out of Jerry.
Paid, and now Pollard. The best case scenario for like a guy like Tony Pollard is getting paid on the franchise tag. That's about probably the top money
$10 million
he's ever going to receive, which is great money. But in terms of a long-term deal, they're just not out there for running backs these days. All right, we want to get to Brian Schottenheimer. One thing I would mention, Ed, as well, I thought you might want to comment on too. Malik Hooker gets a contract extension in relation relative to Zach Martin. It is kind of funny that Diggs, Hooker, it's like while this holdout's going on, they're like just knocking out guys.
And those
left
guys
and
aren't
right.
out of contract either. Zach Martin has 2 years left. These guys both had contracts for this year and beyond. In Diggs' case, they were eligible for the first, or Diggs was eligible for a new contract for the first time, as Micah Parsons will be for the first time after this season. And you can imagine he's probably going to be the highest paid defensive player in the history of the game.
Yeah.
Unless he gets hurt or something this year. And he seems primed to have a monster season based on what we observed at training camp and what you hear every single day. I mean, he practically took out Dak at the knees the other day in a pass rush drill. So he's been a dominant guy. And that's kind of Jerry's logic on not giving the money that Zach Martin wants to him. It's, hey, I gotta pay all these defensive players, and starting with Micah Parsons.
And this vote where the peers, your peers come up with the top 100 players in the NFL, not helping Jerry's cause with Micah, because I believe Micah has already been named the 8th best player in all of the NFL. And when you think how important quarterbacks in and how that thing always skews toward quarterbacks, to be the 8th best player already as he enters his third season is pretty remarkable. All right, Ed, I'm going to let you set this up because this is Brian Schottenheimer, the Cowboys offensive coordinator, and you've known him for a while, and in fact knew his dad. And his dad's been in the news again, his late father, for being a semifinalist for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ed set up this exclusive Doomsday interview, and you'll only hear Ed's voice because I had to head out of camp.
We don't want you to miss your plane. So I waited 2 hours to talk to Brian Schottenheimer in one of the media tents out there. It's interesting because, he's been around the NFL for 24 years as a coach. He's called plays in 12 of those seasons. He's never been in the situation he's in now. He's never been an offensive coordinator who's not calling the plays, as he's going to do for Mike McCarthy. He's known Mike McCarthy a very long time. Mike McCarthy and Brian Schottenheimer both coached in Kansas City under Marty Schottenheimer, who's Brian Schottenheimer's father. But so Schottenheimer's been an offensive coordinator, play caller with the Jets, the Rams, the Seahawks. His offense has finished just once in the top 10 in total yards. That was 2019 in Seattle. But his Seattle offense did finish the last 3 seasons in the top 10 in scoring average with Russell Wilson, obviously, as a quarterback. But he's coached Brett Favre, he's coached Drew Brees, he's now Dak Prescott. So it's interesting, I think, to put into context what he's seeing from Dak and what kind of leadership Dak demonstrates. And so we talk about that and a bunch of other interesting topics with Brian Schottenheimer, the offensive coordinator, but not play caller, at least not yet.
And here it is, Ed and Brian Schottenheimer, Cowboys offensive coordinator.
So the guest on the Doomsday podcast from Oxnard, California, right before I catch my plane and head out, Brian Schottenheimer, the new offensive coordinator of the Cowboys, been a coach in the NFL for 24 years, been a play caller for, I think you said 14 years. But you're one but not the other here this year under Mike McCarthy, the offensive coordinator but not the play caller. So what does that mean your role will be in getting the offense prepared week to week?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Ed. Again, just excited to get a chance to visit with you a little bit from sunny, beautiful Oxnard. The way I look at it is, having called plays for so many years, it's like, my job and the staff's job is to help set the table for Mike to where Mike feels good the prep during the week, the adjustments on game day, what are we good at, the statistical stuff with what the self-scout says compared to what the opponents do. And so I'm almost putting the hat on like, okay, I know what I was looking for. And so easy communication with Mike, but trying to say, okay, hey, this helped me. It should probably help him. And we've always said if Mike feels good on game day, if Dak feels good on game day, it's going to be a good thing for the Cowboys. So that's kind of our job throughout the week. We'll do that, and it's no different in camp. Just watching the film, adjusting, things that we're seeing, making maybe necessary changes for personnel groups and stuff like that. But he's easy to work with.
What were you doing last year? You were already on the staff in some sort of ultra-secret enterprise. You were an offensive coach working really with the defense, from what I understand. So what were you doing last year to help Mike that created this opportunity for you? Yeah,
it was funny. So just, in this profession, it's so crazy. Got fired in Seattle in 2020 after, I'll say it, setting the franchise record for most points scored. But I also saw my dad get fired after a 14-win season, so nothing surprised me.
14-2.
Yeah, 14-2. But then went down to Jacksonville for the Urban Meyer experiment. And after those two things, I was like, look, I'm taking the year off. I had another year on my contract. I'm like, look, I'm going to take another year off. And, it's in our blood. Like, it's just, we really, it's sad to say, but most of us coaches, we don't know what else to do with our lives. And so, the first couple months are great. And then I was talking to a couple teams and, seeing if there would be a role. And this consulting position came up with the Cowboys, which they had actually the year before with Ben McAdoo. Mm-hmm. And it was a cool position. It was basically you're consulting, you're helping both sides of the ball. But for me, I was excited just to get a chance to come and spend a lot of time with the defense. Dan Quinn and I go way back to the time together Seahawks. With the Jets and the Jets back in 2006, 7, and 8. So just to sit in and learn what they were doing and try to, lend an eye and communicate back and forth about, hey, okay, DQ, I see what you guys are doing. Well, here's probably why the offense is doing that. And it was a lot of fun. And it allowed me to do that, but at the same time be around my family a little bit more. It was kind of very busy during the initial part of the week. It settled down towards the weekend other than game day. But it was really good for me to kind of take a step back and, just not reevaluate myself, but reevaluate some, core fundamental beliefs in football and what we're doing. And, of course, it helped now that this role has come about. It's helped me get to know the locker room, some of the players, and what a special culture has been created here with Dallas.
Speak to me about, explain to me, describe. You said Mike is re-energized, that he's calling a plays for the first time in Dallas. Did it for almost his entire 13 years in Green Bay. The one time he gave it up to Tom Clemens, he took it back a short time later and said he'd never do it that way again. Mm-hmm. Comes to Dallas, inherits Kellen Moore, and Kellen Moore calls the plays until this year. What have you seen from Mike in that regard that leads you to describe him as re-energized? Well,
I mean, there is an energy of, when you're the head coach and you're involved in game plan, but you're not calling the plays either offensively or defensively, you do so much administrative stuff, right? I mean, I remember my dad saying, he's like, when I was a young coach and just coming up in the NFL and was quarterback coach, I think with the Chargers, he's like, Brian, you're so anxious to be a head coach. He's like, it's not that great a gig. Like, you do a lot of administrative stuff and you find players and you do all this stuff off the field. And really what we all love as coaches is the chess match. That and spending the time with the players, because the players are what makes this thing go. But, so Mike just being back in meetings and selling his philosophy and his expertise and comparing notes with what's been in place here with Kel and going back to Jason Garrett and then, now me coming in and Coach Solari and coming some of the new pieces. So he's just excited. He's excited to put his fingerprint back on things. And, again, we've got a great staff. We all work well together. It's nice to be around a group of veteran players like Dak, Zach, Tyron, CD, Tony Pollard, but also see some of the young guys coming up. And so it's just, I think he's enjoying the chess match that he's missed.
Being more a part of the competition, deciding the outcome.
And way more involved in just the day-to-day, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that. Like, hey, at the end of the day, it's like, he's got to make the call. We want him to feel good about it. And so that does energize you, does re-energize you. And he's having fun, which is cool to see.
Is it hard to sell a bunch of guys like Dak on embracing new concepts when really, from Dak's point of view, he's run essentially the same system the whole time he's been here, whether it was Jason Garrett, Scott Linehan, or Kellen Moore calling the plays? Do you see?
Absolutely not. That's one of the things I love about this group of veteran players. Like, again, if you talk to Dak, if you talk to Zach, if you talk to Tyler Biadasz, who, again, I'm a huge fan of Tyler, like, they like some of the subtle changes that we've made. They're hungry to win. They're hungry to go find that championship and to get pushed over the edge. And, again, I think that shows confidence in not only their ability to do whatever we ask of them, but also in what Mike's built here and what we're trying to bring here, which is, adjusting things. There's changes. There's subtle changes. But we also protected a bunch of stuff that makes those guys feel like, okay, hey, this is very similar to what we've been doing. And the changes, they actually like them. And so it's been a fun process because, again, we didn't force feed any of these things. These are things that, again, you talk about it through the off-season program, phase 1, phase 2, getting into phase 3. And now that we're in a training camp, we've always said this is phase 1 and phase 2 of the off-season program, you're teaching the system. Phase 3, when you start practicing at OTAs, you want to detail it. And then training camp's about perfecting it. So we're into that stage now where going against great defense every day, great back and forth, but like we're trying to perfect the scheme so that when we get teed up to go play the Giants on opening night, I guess, that we go out there with a ton of confidence.
How will this be different, look different than what Kellen ran?
It'll be subtle things. I mean, again, I'm not going to tip our hand in too many ways.
Come on.
It's a great question. But in reality, again, like I said, subtle changes. We really want to address some of the protection things. Try to clean some of those things up. Just the way we're teaching it, again, won't really look a whole lot of different from a schematical standpoint. And then there's things that we just want to kind of tie together from run game, protections, pass game, all that stuff that we're excited to see get unveiled again when the season starts.
What does it say about Mike McCarthy? And we're going to talk about you and your dad in a second here. But what does it say about Mike McCarthy that, most teams in the NFL are throwing the ball far more than they're running it? And he did in Green Bay for all of his success. You had Brett Favre. You had Aaron Rodgers. But last year, the Cowboys ran the ball by design on 45% of their plays. That's top 6 in the NFL. First time Mike's ever ranked in the top 10. But what is it? And then he's talking about how we need to get better running the football this year. What does that say about him as a head coach or a play caller offensively, that he's willing to go against the direction it seems most other teams are going, and something he's really never done before? Well,
I think, honestly, when you look at it, it shows his experience. It shows his selflessness. I mean, you look at our defense and the way this team is built, like our defense is they're excellent. That's not a secret. Everybody knows that. I get a chance to see them every day when we compete against them. But, there is a formula to win in this league. And when you get into the playoffs, when you play these elite pass rushing teams, if you don't have an ability to physically pound the football at people and wear people down, like when I was coordinating in Seattle, right, we were playing the Rams, 2 times, sometimes 3 times every year. And it's like the best thing to do against Aaron Donald and that defense is not to throw the football and get him isolated on a guard. It's to come after him and beat him up in the running game and take body shots. And it's a little bit like a heavyweight fight. And so I think Mike understands there's a formula for winning. And winning drives every decision that we make, that he makes. And so, again, I think it speaks to his experience. I think it speaks to his ability to say, hey, what is best for the Cowboys? But let's be honest. There's going to be games where we have to throw the ball 40, 45 times to win. Maybe it's just the way the game goes, or there's going to be times maybe we run it 40, 45 times. So I think the best teams I've been around, Ed, that's what they're able to do. Whatever the game plan calls for, and that's including adjustments on game day, whatever it calls for, you're willing as a play caller to adapt and attack how the game's being played.
You mentioned yesterday you've coached Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, Brett Favre. How would you, I don't want to say compare, but how is their leadership like what you see from Dak Prescott now that you're coaching him up close?
It's really cool because each one of their personalities is obviously a little bit different. The number one thing that's very consistent is there's a hunger and a drive to be great. They've all loved football. They love the chess match. They want to talk protections. They want to talk reads. They're football junkies. I don't know how you're an elite quarterback in this league without being a football junkie. I don't think it happens. And so, from that standpoint, that's a consistent theme with all of them. They're all extremely driven. They're all tremendously hard workers. They put a ton into taking care of their bodies. Dak's always doing stuff before practice, after practice, a lot like Drew did, a lot like Andrew Luck did, all these guys, again, that you...
Not far.
Yeah. No. Brett was a very instinctive player. I love my time with Brett, but he was a little bit more interested sometimes in seeing what the deer cameras were doing back in Mississippi than maybe doing the extra benches and stretches and things like that. But it's just it's fun to see these guys, how there's so many similarities. But Dak is just a special guy. He's obviously been through a lot in his life. Maybe one of the most authentic people I've ever met in my short time knowing him. There's a humility to him. I think, he's kind of one of those humble servant leadership type guys where he'd give you the shirt off the back of his off his back for you. But at the same time, if you're competing against him, he ain't gonna find a way to win. And it's cool to see guys like that have had the success that they've had, been through the trials and tribulations. Again, I won't say names, but I've seen some of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play this game sit in my office and literally weep for different reasons. Pressure of the position, preparation, things like that, injuries.
Disappointment.
Yeah, disappointment after a tough season or a tough year. And the cool thing as I look back at it is it just shows that there was a true connection and a love for one another. And Dak and I are working towards that because that's a big part of coaching an elite player like Dak.
What do you do about the interceptions, or do you regard them as... He's a guy who's really never had an interception problem until last year. Now all of a sudden he's the king of interceptions because he tied for the league leading interceptions one year. Have the changes you made offensively plus personnel, like bringing Brandon Cooks in, going to create easier throws, more separation, and you just trust that he's not going to put the ball in jeopardy, which is a characteristic he's always had?
Well, no. Look, I'm not concerned about the interceptions. Again, I totally understand that interceptions are part of the game. There's two types of interceptions. There's bad throws, there's bad decisions. What you want to do is with all quarterbacks, you want to lower the number of bad decision interceptions. And being aggressive, being confident, that stuff's going to happen. But I have zero doubts in my mind that having watched them all with Dak and Scott Tolzien and Mike and looking at him, that he understands. He understands there's a premium on the ball. And you can do that. Put the premium on the football, but still play with a confidence and an aggressive mindset that we want him to play with. And so, again, I don't believe it'll be a storyline this year. It certainly was a storyline last year, one that's easy to talk about in the media and everybody's got an opinion. But if you emphasize something with Dak, he's going to get it corrected.
I don't want to ask you about too many players on the roster, but one I do want to ask you about. Tony Pollard is going to be a number one running back this year, and I think he demonstrated last year he's fully capable of that. But one of the interesting guys in that depth chart in that room is Deuce Vaughn. And you had a guy in Darren Sproles in San Diego who was similar in terms of the way he's built. In fact, talking to Vaughn yesterday, that's the guy he models himself after. How does that help, knowing how a guy like that can be effectively used at that size with a similar skill set?
Well, it's really interesting because, the cool thing, same alma mater, both K-State Wildcats, right? We drafted Darren believe it was 2004 out of K-State. Brought him in, and again, you see him, and you're just like, whoa. You see him standing next to LaDainian, and you're like, oh, that's a big difference right there. But there's again, something about these shorter backs that people have always questioned. Nobody's shown them the respect based on their talent level, not based on their size. But you take a talented athlete like Darren or Deuce, you give them the instincts and the aptitude of understanding the game, which comes from being around, for Deuce being around his dad, Chris, and they just process things faster than maybe a guy that's 6 foot and 220 pounds, built like a Greek god, but he can't read a 3 technique, spike into an A gap, and make the adjustment. So the parallels are very cool. And Darren had a hell of a career. And I said yesterday in my presser, and I stand by it. Like, I'm not saying Deuce is Darren. I want Darren to be Darren and Deuce to be Deuce. And it's Deuce's time to shine. As Darren, I think he's doing some coaching or something now. But the parallels of being around Darren certainly help myself, Mike, Jeff Blasco understand certainly ways that we can use him to our advantage. And those are things that we've had, once we drafted him, got him on the team, that we've had a lot of conversation, and we're excited to see how he does preseason football. And again, there'll be a step up and maybe a step back, but then maybe 4 or 5 steps forward, then a step back, and that's all part of being a young player.
So instead, I wanted to talk about your dad, who is up for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's won 200 regular season games with 4 different teams. What was it like being his son, and when did you decide that you wanted to coach?
Well, he was an amazing father. Being a father myself now, having 2 kids, a son that's getting ready to go off to Auburn and a daughter that's a junior in high school. The one negative of this profession, if there is one negative, is the amount of time you spend away from your family. And so my dad and I, as he was getting started in coaching, we found a love for golf. And he loved golf. He'd play all the time. And I remember waking me up on Saturday mornings to go play golf at 6:30. And I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and dreading getting out of bed. Like, why are we going to do this? And I remember learning, you're sweeping the dew off the greens, going, this is stupid. Why am I getting my shoes wet? And but it's crazy, Ed, because I remember after about 14, 15 holes, I started thinking about what we were going to do on the way home. And that was stop off and get a chocolate milkshake. And we would sit in the parking lot at one of the little picnic tables, and he and I would talk about life for 30 minutes. And it was just really, really fun father-son time. And, we didn't talk a thing about football. We just talked about life and being a man and, just his story and how proud he was of me. And so, again, I look back on it now and I laugh because I was like, man, I really didn't want to get out of bed. But imagine what the memories that I would have missed. And, how I decided I wanted to get into coaching is I really did want to play. And then
you were a quarterback.
I was a quarterback, and I went to the University of Kansas and was a scholarship athlete there. And I kind of realized my freshman year at KU that I was 3rd on the depth chart, and I traveled, but I was going to redshirt. But I really realized at that point that I wasn't really good enough to play at the next level. I think it was kind of a wake-up call for me. So that's why I made the decision. I was like, look, I can stay here at KU, maybe get in some games, but I want to go learn. I want to go get my PhD in coaching. And so literally about 2 weeks before the start of my redshirt freshman year at KU, I made the decision I want to transfer. Quick story. My dad was already at training camp, so that tells you how late it was, up in River Falls. And I'll never forget, I went and woke my mom up, like I said, about 2 weeks before the start of camp. And I said, hey, look, I've been thinking about this. I want to do it. I want to transfer. And she said, well, we got to go up and see your dad. And so we fly up, practice ends, we go, we sit down, we talk, and he says, no, I'm not letting you do it. And it's the first time I've really kind of ever stood. I was like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm transferring. And as I look back on it, it was him challenging me to make sure I was convicted. And he pushed back a number of times, and then finally he said, okay, so this is what you want to do? I said, yeah, that's what I want to do. And he called in the director of college scouting and said, hey, here's the deal. Brian's transferring. We need to figure out, which teams are in need of a third quarterback. And made a bunch of trips, but I kind of fell in love. Coach Spurrier was throwing the ball all around down in the swamp, down in Florida in Gainesville. And, I wanted to go and kind of see what was going on down there. And so I tell people I truly felt like for my 4 years at Florida, I had a backstage pass to truly, at the time, the greatest team in college football. We won 4 SEC championships. We won a national championship my senior year. But just watching Steve and being around the great players we had, Danny Werfel and Fred Taylor, Ike Hilliard, Riddell Anthony, it truly was like getting a PhD. And it just showed me that, hey, look, I went here for a reason, and I learned a lot, which helped me, I think, move up the coaching ranks pretty quick.
What traits do you think you have that you share with your dad as far as your approach to coaching?
I think I'm a good communicator. Let me speak in terms of him. I'm not going to speak about myself. He was a great communicator. I think I have that ability. I relate to people well. I love people. I love being around people. I love getting to know someone's heart. I think he was like that. He was a very genuine man. You know him the way he was. Yeah. Very organized. He was very organized. I'm talking about to the nth degree. The itinerary, the schedule was unbelievably precise. Precise and packed when we used to have, 3 a days, if you will. And then, again, just I think watching him from afar, there's a work ethic that you learn being a coach's kid. And he always talked about you can outwork people. And I truly believe it. And I saw him do it. And so those are a couple things that I know, have been influenced and put on my heart just from looking up to him for so many years. And it was really important for me to coach with him. I really did want to coach with him and did for a while because I knew how good he was. And I wanted to learn from him. And so I look back on those years, and what was hard for me is funny. Thanksgiving 2008, we're having Thanksgiving dinner in San Diego at my mom and dad's house. My wife's there. I think we had both our kids at this point. And we're talking about the day. We had practice that morning or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, Marty, he did this today or whatever in the team meeting. She goes, okay, stop. It's Thanksgiving. Can we call him Dad? But I just refused to go there because, when I was in the office, when I was talking to him, when I was talking to him, it was Coach. When I was talking about him, it was Marty. But Thanksgiving, she was like, nope, enough's enough. It's Thanksgiving. Don't call him that. And so I was like, okay, I'll give it to you just for today. But, it was a really awesome thing to, as I look back now, to know I shared a couple of years of being on his staff. And I really wanted to help him get over the hump and win that championship. Yeah, we were never able to do it, but we had a lot of fun working together.
Where were you when the 2 losses to Denver occurred, the fumble and the drive?
The drive, I literally was in the end zone where Rich Carlos kicked they say game-winning kick. I still think it was wide to the left. They don't really care what I think, but I literally was coming right at us, and I believe that. And then, crazy enough, we did not go to the fumble, but it was such a heartbreaking loss that my appendix almost burst. They landed back in Cleveland. I had an unbelievable stomach ache, and the very next day they rushed me to the hospital. I had to get my appendix out. So that is truly the agony of defeat when you have to get your appendix removed after losing the second AFC Championship game, and your dad's like, oh my gosh, I got to go to Cleveland Clinic with my son and go have him get his
puts it all in perspective.
It does. And so, but look, I'm so proud of him and what he accomplished. And to this day, almost every Sunday when I walk out on the field, either a former player that's now doing something different, coaching, whatever, or someone from the front office will come up to me and tell me a story of how my dad impacted them. And it just absolutely makes my week and makes me incredibly proud to say I'm his son.
To full circle this, it was in Kansas City on your dad's staff that you met Mike McCarthy?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And here you are working together. What's the first thing you remember about working with Mike McCarthy, other than the story you told about the players?
Yeah. You know, I didn't know Mike. The cool thing was being a former quarterback, is I always wanted to be in the quarterback room. To any young coach out there, right? Like, if you have a quarterback background, get in the QB room. That's where all the stuff happens, just because you're in charge. You're driving the race car, like we like to say. But just the expertise of Mike in quarterback play, you know, the detail, the way that he learned to train the quarterbacks from Paul Hackett, from the footwork, the eye progressions, the decision-making, the play caller's purpose, all those things. Like, it is an exact science, and it was really fascinating for me, who was around a great coach in Steve Spurrier, but Steve was just kind of an elite play caller, and, you know, again, we were ahead of the times in college football, but like Mike coming from Paul with the West Coast system of timing, rhythm, accuracy, balance of the quarterback, that was the first thing that jumped out at me, is wow, the way they train the quarterbacks is something I really want to learn and become an expert in. And to this day, I've still, you know, used it throughout my career and really believe in it.
Interesting. Well, great stuff. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Have great admiration for your dad, who I covered many times. He always recommended the best steakhouse in town.
He knew those, yeah, he knew those for sure. He was a little bit of a foodie, yeah, a little bit of foodie.
But a great coach, deserving of the Hall of Fame, and hopefully this is the year that it happens for him.
Well, I appreciate that, and
look forward to working with you this year, and actually the increased visibility you'll have on Sunday now.
Yeah, well, again, I think it's cool for me to be able to carry on the tradition. The last thing that I really shared with my dad when he was laying in hospice, and it was kind of cool. That was another reason why, again, I planned on taking the year off, was just how much I appreciated him showing me the joy of coaching, because he really did. Yes, there's long hours, you're away from your family a lot, but there's also some amazing things that come out of it. And so I'm proud to say I'm a coach. My kids are proud to say I'm a coach. They wouldn't want it any other way. When I talked about taking the year off last year, they're like, "Why, Dad? It sounds like it's to be a boring year." And I'm like, "We're all the same." And so I appreciate you making the time. I appreciate the kind words about my dad, and excited about this upcoming season and what we can do here in Dallas.
Thanks much.
All right,
look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
All right, Ed, that was strong work, and really enjoyed. It's kind of funny. Kellen Moore had a nice run with the Cowboys. In some ways, I think Brian Schottenheimer enjoys the media, even that public one that we saw, his news conference. He seemingly kind of embraced that, felt very comfortable in that space, and probably a guy that had hoped at some point maybe he'll still have a shot at being a head coach. And 10 years ago or so, I think he was in the running at times, and that may go back to some of his Seattle days or whatever. But what was Ed, after that conversation and all the things we were talking about out there with Mike McCarthy and Schottenheimer, and the play calling with Mike McCarthy, that's been a big theme. What were your biggest takeaways from your conversation with Schottenheimer?
Well, I mean, the stuff I enjoyed the most, the most revealing stuff to me, was kind of the personal part of the interview about, his own history and transferring to Florida for the specific purpose of recognizing, hey, I'm probably not going to be a good enough athlete to play professional football, but maybe I would like to coach and I would like to explore that. And so, he transferred to Florida, and Steve Spurrier, who was using a lot of unique concepts in the passing game in college football at the time. And just his experiences with his father, going to play golf with him, even though he didn't have a lot of interest in playing golf at the time, but it wound up being some of the best time that he spent with his father, who, as I said in the interview, won 200 games with four different franchises as a head coach, but didn't have great success in the postseason. And that's something obviously the Cowboys are very familiar with. But from the standpoint of, I think his impressions of Dak were interesting. Obviously, he thinks a lot of the guy, as almost everybody who coaches or interacts with Dak does. I mean, you were out there with us when we did the John Kitna interview, and Kitna said the first thing Dak said to him when he got on the bus at the Pro Bowl and saw Kitna was going to be his quarterback's coach was, "What are you going to do to make me great? Like, let's get started." So that mentality, I think, is something that Schottenheimer admires and sees a commonality with the other Hall of Fame type quarterbacks he's coached in his career. I think it's interesting, the whole, he has a history with Darren Sproles, and now you have Deuce Vaughn, and can they create a role for him? Is he going to earn a role to play on Sundays, on game day as a rookie? I assume he's going to make the team. Maybe that's a bad assumption, but I think going into these preseason games, the expectation is he's going to make the team. It's just a matter of, can he do enough to justify being on the roster on game day and have a role in the offense. And Schottenheimer's experience with Sproles, I think, makes him somebody who's not going to prejudge a guy just based on his unusual size characteristics.
Mm-hmm. I also think, Ed, that the affinity and the respect that he has for Mike McCarthy, this has to be, even with the added pressure of calling plays, this may be the most comfortable McCarthy has been in his time with the Cowboys, because he really has surrounded himself with people he's known and he's been around forever. And this is in the early days, it was, Mike, we're glad to have you, but we want this guy calling plays. This person's going to call defense, all that kind of stuff.
They let him pick the defensive coordinator, and he picked Mike Nolan, and he's lucky that he recognized quickly that had to change, and he had somebody ready who was beyond able in Dan Quinn, and they have a history too. But yeah, to your point, I think it is interesting that what a different year this must be for Mike McCarthy.
And that Schottenheimer doesn't seem to be, at this point in his career, and he's about to, coming up on 50, where other young coaches or whatever might be kind of like Kellen Moore. Is he going to be a head coach? Always kind of angry. I'm not saying he was doing that to Mike, but you have someone who's not trying to usurp Mike in any way, and really seems to have a focus on, I just want Mike McCarthy to be successful, and I want to do everything in the world to help him prepare for these games and get him ready, to call plays and go back to this. And so it was interesting. We found out from Mike McCarthy that he had gone back to his first year of calling plays in 2000 and looked at some things. And he reminded me of how well he did it that year.
Didn't you say he was assistant coach of the year?
Yeah. I was basically asking him, like, what'd you think of your play
Aaron
calling?
Brooks,
When you went back to, Aaron Brooks came in because Jeff Blake got hurt, I believe, that season. And I was just asking him, how'd you think of your play calling? And he's like, well, might want to look this up. I was the assistant coach of the year. I'm like, okay.
Well, that was Mike's way of, hey, I'm an accomplished guy, but I don't want to brag about myself. So why don't you do some little research? But I think what your research is going to, you'll learn from your research is that I was pretty good at this right from the start.
Yes.
But I think I don't know that you were trying to say that there was some kind of competition with Kellen Moore, that Mike did never really trust him as a play caller because he inherited him. He was, Jerry's kind of whiz kid on offense. Maybe saw him as another Jason Garrett, type of guy who Jerry envisioned eventually being the head coach. I think Kellen Moore put everything he had into creating the right kind of offense and calling plays to win games. I don't think Kellen Moore had any ulterior motive either, but it has to. Jerry has created awkward circumstances for a lot of his coaching hires. When most guys get hired and they get to bring in their staff, and that's just not the way it is here. Jerry has guys on the previous holdover staff that he wants to keep, and kind of if you're not going to go along with that program, you're probably not going to get the job. And so I don't think we'll ever really know if when Mike McCarthy first came here 3 years ago, what would have happened had he insisted that he call the plays. Would Jerry have hired him, or would he have not gotten the job because Jerry wanted Kellen Moore to call the plays? So now Mike is getting the chance to compete. That's what appeals to him, right? And you heard that from Schottenheimer. Mike's in it, and now he's got a specific role that allows him to have a greater influence in determining the outcome of the game.
I just like the thought of Mike McCarthy being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, and we say he finally has a role on this team. He finally has like a place carved out for him on this staff.
I mean, I think if you go back and listen to this show when they hired him and he wasn't the play caller, my position was like, well, that's his value.
Yeah.
Like, to me, Mike McCarthy's value as a head coach is he's a play caller. He's done it for 13 years.
Correct.
He won a Super Bowl doing it. So why is he not doing it here for a franchise that hasn't won a Super Bowl? in 25 plus years.
Yeah.
At the time. And I think it was because now he says, he didn't change the system. He adapted to the new system and the new terminology because it was all about advancing Dak and the players from where they were. And so the burden was on him. He didn't want to change the system. But we don't know if that's really true. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Like, you don't hire a head coach who's been a play caller his whole career, who vowed he would never do it any other way. Then he comes here and he doesn't call plays for 3 years. And then you get stuffed by the 49ers and eliminated the playoffs earlier than expected because you can't score enough points.
Yeah.
And you reach a mutual agreement with Kellen Moore to go somewhere else while McCarthy all of a sudden is calling the plays. And Jerry's like, this is why I think we're going to be great this year. This is why we have a chance to win, because Mike's calling the plays. Well, he could have been calling the plays 3 years ago.
Yeah. Why'd you wait? Yeah. And it's going to be, it really comes down to, it's funny that we do all this and we'll analyze every game, and we're going to do this whole podcast. And what they really need to have happen this year is for somebody to knock out San Francisco either before the playoffs or in the wild card round, and not have to play them in the divisional round.
Right.
If they had to play them for an NFC title game, I was joking with Cowherd recently, and I'm only half joking, like everybody's always kind of like, well, Cowboys are measured on Super Bowls. Well, not really anymore. Like, if they got to an NFC title game, it would be the end of the world right now. I mean, that would be huge. Everybody would get huge extensions. That would feel like a Super Bowl, since it's been how many seasons? 28? 28 seasons since that's happened. All right, Ed, another Werder.
Speaking of 28 years ago.
Speaking of 28 years ago, the quarterback of the Cowboys was Troy Aikman. And Troy Aikman happens to live in Southern California, and there's only...
Well, he lives there part of the time. He lives in Dallas most of the
year. Okay, I don't know if we have to clarify everything I say.
Well, I mean, for tax purposes.
He does.
You're talking about California versus Texas.
He has a home in... Yeah, let's worry about his taxes. He does have a home out Montecito Way.
He's barely making it as it is.
That's right. He's just getting by on his $18 million a year. But there's only a few broadcasters that Troy would think about coming to spend the day in Oxnard, maybe spending a little extra time with a certain broadcaster. And, of course, we happen to have on this podcast one of those broadcasters. It's Ed Werder. And Ed set up the background of this. This was for a special kind of ABC/ESPN deal that you did, but it was very cool that you got to spend some time with Troy Aikman. That aired on the national show, but we're going to get to hear, I mean, whoever was filming this for you and doing all that, it's very nice that we have access to this.
Right. So I was out there to do the special Saturday coverage, Back Together. It's a big NFL initiative with all its TV partners, one of which is ESPN. And so because of, in the past, I've always done a live interview with Dak Prescott. He's been very generous with his time, and he's always accommodated me for that particular show. Until last year, when the schedule changed and it became apparent at the last minute that the Cowboys were going to be on the field during the entire time our show was on ABC, which is what we prioritize. And so Dak taped it for me on Friday. Well, this time I felt like it would be better to do something different. And so I reached out to Troy and asked if he was going to be in Southern California. He said, actually, I'm coming to Cowboys practice that first week, their first practice on the field. And so he agreed to do a couple different segments with me, one of which was topics on 5 or 6 NFL quarterback situations around the NFL, starting with, of course, Aaron Rodgers going to the Jets. And then this segment, which was Cowboy-centric. And I picked 4 or 5 of what I thought were the best topics. And we started with what his thoughts are on Dak Prescott in his age 30 season, not having yet won a Super Bowl, which no Cowboys quarterback has won their first Super Bowl after turning 30. Roger did it when he was 29, and Aikman did it when he was 26. And then we got into McCarthy as a play caller and just some other, random thoughts about the Cowboys and what expectations he has for them this year.
All right, and it is really cool to get Troy to participate in something like this in the offseason, because his time in the offseason is precious, and it's spent mostly with his shirt off running the Katy Trail or hanging out the beaches of California. But great to have this opportunity. Here is Ed Werder's one-on-one with Cowboys legendary quarterback Troy Aikman.
We're here at Cowboys Training Camp in Oxnard, California, just about a half hour from where your own first training camp with the Cowboys was held in 1989, Jimmy Johnson. You won the first of your 3 Super Bowls when you were 26. Roger Staubach won the first of his 2 Super Bowls when he was 29. Dak Prescott turns 30 in this training camp. How convinced are you that he's going to be the next Dallas quarterback to win a Super Bowl?
Well, I'm hopeful he's the next Cowboys quarterback to win the Super Bowl. There are no guarantees, as we know. I think that he's had some good teams that have been around him. He was fortunate to come in even as a rookie and have a good supporting cast and allowed him to play at a high level. And I think, though, that the team that he has this year could be his best. I like what they have at the skill positions. Offensive line has always been one of the strengths overall for this football team. And, we'll see. And I think the defense is going to continue to get better, and they were awfully good even a year ago. So they have all the makings, and they've had the makings for quite some time. It's really just a matter of whether or not they can play their best football when they get into January, and that hasn't happened, unfortunately, for too long of a time for the Cowboys.
You were just over there talking to Mike McCarthy.
Yeah.
Big change in this camp for Dak. Is it Mike McCarthy? You would think when you get hired after 13 years in Green Bay and winning a Super Bowl that the value in hiring Mike McCarthy is him calling the plays, and yet he hasn't done it. Kellen Moore did it for his first 3 years. Now year 4, he is going to do it. Mm-hmm. How do you see that benefiting Dak and the offensive players?
Well, time will tell. I think it's easy in July to say that was a great move and that this is going to be a step forward, but you just never know. I was surprised when Mike got the job that he did not then take on play calling, because I know in Green Bay when he gave up play calling for a short period of time, when he took it back, he said he would never give up play calling again because he enjoys it, and then secondly, he feels that he's really good at it. So I'm not surprised now that he wants his fingerprints a little bit more on this football team and on the offense and what they're doing, but what that might look like is anybody's guess. I do think it'll look different than what we've seen with Kellen Moore. And I think Mike, understanding the position that he's in right now coming into this season and where this football team is, I think it's probably the right move, at least in his mind. And how that looks at the end of the day, time will tell.
And last season, uncharacteristically, Dak Prescott, a lot of turnovers, tied for the league lead in interceptions with 15, even though he only made 12 starts. One of the issues seemed to be the receivers didn't get a lot of separation on a consistent basis. He's thrown into a lot of tight windows. They go out and get Brandon Cooks in a trade, a vertical type receiver. How do you see that dynamic making things easier for Dak?
Well, I love Brandon Cooks. I've loved him since he came into the league, and what he has done really everywhere he's been. For a player who's been as productive as he has been, it's been pretty remarkable that he's bounced around the league the way that he has. But I know that Dak is really excited about him. To have another weapon, I don't know what quarterback wouldn't be excited to have Brandon Cooks on their roster. And I also think that in addition to him, Michael Gallup, now another year removed from the injury that he had, is going to help him a lot as well. So there's a lot of things to really like about this offense. And Dak's going to be the beneficiary of it, as every quarterback is when they have that kind of talent around them.
Last question. Cowboys coming off consecutive 12-win seasons under Mike McCarthy, who told us in this camp that he expects to break through this year. Whether he does or doesn't remains to be determined, but Tom Brady's retired out of the NFC. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers is now in the AFC. How great is this opportunity for the Cowboys now, those circumstances being considered?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think the strength, at least when you look at the quarterbacks, it clearly resides in the AFC. Now, what does that mean exactly for the Cowboys in terms of being able to advance all the way to the Super Bowl? They've got to get out of their own division, first of all, and the division has gotten good. The Giants, of course, they were a bit of a surprise last year, but Philadelphia and what they've been able to do, they look like they're going to be just as good, if not better, than they were a year ago as well. So trying to get out of the division, but I think that's a real strength, because when you look at when the NFC East has been strong, as it was when I was playing, if you can win that division, then you really can play with anybody. Now, there's other teams in the NFC too, San Francisco being one of those that I really like, but I think there's an opportunity here. But first, the Cowboys have to be able to get out of the East, and they're capable of doing that.
It's been 28 years since the Cowboys have been to a championship game. I think you were the quarterback in that game.
Been a long time. Been a long time.
That's it from Oxnard. Back to you.
All right, Ed. It is interesting. Every time I hear Troy and talk about Dak and talk about the current state of the Cowboys, at times he's expressed some frustration. I think it'll be very interesting. I think Troy, for reasons we won't get into, seems to maybe have a little more respect, or may even pull a little harder for Dak than he did to the previous quarterback. But I do think he has. I think he has an affinity, and he just really appreciate what Dak is about, right? And so that was good. That was really good stuff, and appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, I think he supports Dak because he believes he takes an approach that was very similar, to what Troy did in terms of being the clear leader of the entire football team, the work ethic that he has, the determination to improve, every year. I thought it was interesting that Troy made the point that Dak came into a very good team and has had very good teams every year for the most part, and yet has so far not delivered. And now this season, his age 30 season, in Troy's opinion, and it's hard to argue otherwise, I think this is probably the best roster he's ever had. And again, is Jerry really going to start that kind of season where he's gone out and gotten Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore? Is he really going to start that season taking a great risk on offense without Zach Martin? But yeah, I think Troy does admire Dak Prescott. I think he's been a loyal supporter of his for a very long time. I think they have a connection. I think they talk frequently during the season, certainly in weeks where Troy's doing a Cowboys game, which he doesn't do nearly as often at ESPN as he did at Fox, although I think he does have the Chargers game, right? The Kellen Moore the rematch with Kellen Moore is a Monday Night Football game that Troy and Joe will do. But yeah, really grateful to Troy for giving us some time. And I mean, he's a guy who doesn't ever pull any punches. He gives his honest opinion about things. It's detailed. It's well reasoned, and appreciate that he answered those 4 or 5 questions right there.
That really 2 excellent interviews, and Ed, great work. We had a lot of fun in Oxnard. We actually got a little work done. You more than me, and but we got to get out into our Andrea's and some of our local spots and got to hear some good music, 70s cover band or something. We had some good times.
Heather's on Fire.
Saw some white man overbite. Yeah, Heather's on Fire, dancing, and so we had a very nice time out there. But well done on that. And Ed, as we look forward to Saturday's preseason game, and there may have been a time in the Doomsday podcast where we actually did pods after preseason games. I think we've decided to go away from that. And, of course, we'll be reacting, thanks to Frito Nation Productions and all our great sponsors. We'll be reacting to all the games this year. And Ed has agreed, after long negotiations and after a holdout, to be with us again this season. And if
Jerry placates Zach Martin like you placated me, Zach's going to miss the whole season.
Nice. Ed, some of the players, some of our, we've been looking at it. I did want to note Schoonmaker, the second-round tight end, is on the practice field now. I don't think we'll see him in this preseason game against Jacksonville. I think everybody will have their eyes on probably Mozzie Smith, the first-round pick. And I would say the early returns, Ed, seeing him in practice, seeing the strength, the movement, the quickness, all of that, I think are pretty – seems like everybody's pretty pleased with what they've seen. But I think seeing him in a preseason game will be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think it's hard to judge any defensive lineman, and certainly, a defensive tackle who's been drafted first to – stop the run and take on blocks and free up the linebackers in the run game. It's hard to evaluate that kind of player unless it's in a game. And so we'll get our first look at Mozzie Smith, who's done nothing but impress people as they've become more and more physical in practice. He's played not only nose tackle, but the 3 technique as well. Seems to be, from observation, a hard guy for anybody in the offensive line to move one-on-one. I think guys seem to like, playing next to him and around him. I think they've really got a potentially strong rotation there with him and, Jonathan Hankins, who they acquired from the Raiders in a trade last year. You got, OC there as a second, third year player now at that position.
Yeah, at least third.
And so I think they're better at that position. And I know Dan Quinn really feels like they need to get the run stopped on the early downs to create even better pass rush situations where their rush can overtake games and create turnovers, which they've led the league in, the last 2 years. And that's what drafting Mosley Smith was all about. It was all about being better on these early rundowns. And if you catch the 49ers again in the playoffs, you theoretically have a real reason to think you can play them better than you have in the past.
Yeah. I'll believe it when I see it, but you would think that'd give you a better shot. And also, hopefully, having a veteran quarterback like Dak at some point, you would like that to take over, which it didn't in that game last year.
Maybe to get him a couple playmakers, and maybe Okay. I mean, Tony, they went into that game, in my opinion, without Amari Cooper had been traded. The receiver was a problem all year long. Everybody talks about the interceptions. I don't think it's an interception problem. I think it's a wide receiver problem. One that they had fixed by acquiring Brandon Cooks, who they tried to get at the trade deadline last year. They recognized they had a problem at the wide receiver position, and they tried to fix it in season, but they couldn't agree to terms, and so they didn't get Brandon Cooks until the off season. But they went into the game against the 49ers with two playmakers, and they lost one of them, Tony Pollard, at halftime. So you have almost no chance to score against a great defense when you don't have enough playmakers. They have more playmakers now. We'll see. That's part of Tony Pollard getting more opportunities without Zeke Elliott taking half the snaps. It's, hey, let's figure out if Kevontae Turpin can, create some plays in the passing game with some of these shorter throws and easier routes to run. And what effect is that going to have on CeeDee Lamb? Is Michael Gallup going to be better year 2 from his ACL recovery? So, and that's where Deuce Vaughn factors in.
I love what you're saying. I think we got a better shot with this angle that you're putting out there of having Dak back on the podcast. with you going this route. We got Tolbert, you got Jalen Brooks. We'll be looking for some of this firepower you're talking about. How are they going to figure in? How are like the 3rd, 4th, 5th wide receivers? What's that competition going to look like? And then my man, Stretch Stevens. We've got a stretch on this podcast. John Stevens, 6'6" tight end that's turned some heads in camp. How will he look at tight end?
Former wide receiver.
Yeah.
Who took advantage of Schoonmaker being out.
Correct.
A lot of reps were available, and he took them, and a lot of days he dominated in the red zone. He's lined up outside, which is to take advantage of his background as a wide receiver. He's transitioning to tight end. Difficult position to play. It's very much a nuanced type position when you're receiver oriented like he is. But as we said, Dak has the 2nd most touchdown passes to tight ends in the NFL over the last 2 years. And we saw last year the Cowboys scored more touchdowns with 3 tight ends on the field than any team in football. So I think this guy's got a shot.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and we're going to monitor this. And they think there'll be quite a bit of competition for that 53-man roster or whatever it is now. Have they changed
it's 53?
Oh, we got 53. Okay, Ed. It's going to be, it'll be fun. We're going to get ready. We'll start ramping up. But these last 3 podcasts involving our trip to Oxnard, appreciate everything you've done to make those really good. In fact, our sales team, which is mainly me, but everybody has been very excited about some of the work we've done and some of the production, and Frito Nation Productions, Mark Frito Friedman doing a tremendous job as, his production company's better than ever. As we pulled in today, he had some like big time local.
Wait to get in the studio.
This guy, J.D. Tomlin, I wish we could get him on the show. This guy is big time.
Big time real estate. He's like the next Donald Trump. Well, maybe not.
Let's not. Yeah, we like JD. We don't want to get politics involved.
I just meant Trump did pretty well in real estate.
That's right. He had his moments. Okay, Frito, if you could adjust that on the editing.
Well, we just said he was editing our podcast. Now we'll find out. When
we'll find out.
That remark is still on there. Frito's asleep at the switch again.
I think he wants JD to hear that. JD might like the candidate you mentioned. Okay, it is the Doomsday podcast for Ed Werder and Mark Frito Friedman. I'm Matt Matt Mosley. Good night from far North Dallas.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.